that is going to get you nothing when getting people to think that you are an effective person who is broken from somebody who is seen as a generationally failed president will make you look effective and strong. And you will gain those voters who are swinging on that issue of competency.
So cute, my little Hasanito.
Hasan got me on here. He wanted me to talk, like, kind of give the case for why Kamala can still win. And I'm just going to go over the cuck Nate Silver model right here. So the reason why people are kind of flipping out right now, number one, because her campaign is awful and really stupid. And number two, but the forecast is like insanely close right now. I think that his thing, it's like basically 50-50. Everything's showing 50-50 right now. So, like, it's not like she's not really in like a dominant position that Biden or like I'm gonna go to the standard map instead of the stupid woke map that he has here.
Can you also zoom in on the on your screen a little bit
Yeah,
so
sure.
we can see it better? We
Yeah,
got old people in here. Not myself.
yeah,
Me and Felix are both millennials with a zoomer brain. We're the most Gen Z millennials out there.
yeah. You guys are.
Yeah.
You guys are honorary Gen Z. This is not Felix. This is not Felix. I'm Jewish, but I'm not Felix.
This is an anti-Semitic community.
Yeah,
So
this is an anti-Semitic community. I'm gonna cancel you guys. I'm gonna go to the Barry Weiss. I'm gonna catch you all. Nope. So yeah, Michigan leading blue is copium. So this is the current map that Nate Silver has. This is kind of the consensus right now. Um. And as you can see, I think well, this doesn't show the electoral votes, but the basic state of play for everybody. Everybody's saying that it's all copium. I mean, this is I disagree with a lot of the stuff that he adds a lot of pollsters in here that I don't think are like things you should add. I had an article about that, but like there are a lot of who's in chat. Okay, Michigan, Wisconsin may flip it. Yeah. So whatever. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop paying attention to you people.
yeah. Don't pay attention to
Yeah.
chat. You know this already.
Yeah, I gotta lock in. Okay, but so basically, the state of play for this election, just to go over the really basic stuff for like the stupid people, I guess there are like like 7 or so states. It used to be 6, now it's 7 states that are like legitimately important. Uh, there is Arizona and Nevada, which are the southwest states, Georgia and North Carolina, which are the southeast states, and then you have the 3 Great Lakes states up north. All the other states are like varying degrees of not competitive at all. Like they're not really worth paying attention to.
Yeah.
Florida, Texas, like I wouldn't say she's not in a position where theirs are going to be relevant at this point. I very much live in the world where like the New York Times poll had Trump up by 13 in Florida. That I think was like feels a little accurate, like compared to the ones that show it more competitive. But so like the way that things have settled basically is that Kamala has not had great polling in Arizona or Georgia, contrary to what some people thought. Like it's part of long-standing trends we've been seeing with Democrats not doing particularly well with non-white voters compared to past years, and doing a lot better with white voters. Yeah, my profile picture has been Berlusconi for years. Um, yeah, nobody. Who are people on Reddit saying that like Texas and Florida are gonna flip? I mean, I don't know, but
Stop reading
they're not.
chat.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Sorry. Um, but
Lock in. Lock
okay.
in.
Okay. Yeah. So the path for Democrats always has been like they get to like 230 or so electoral votes with all the blue states here, like the Northeast, Illinois, the these mountain states, and the West Coast and Hawaii. That gets them to a position where if they get Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
they get to exactly 270 electoral votes. The bare minimum you need to win, but that has always been the path. It was the path for Biden when he was in the race because he polled very poorly with white, especially poorly with non-white voters, but he was holding a little tougher with white voters. Kamala has improved a lot among non-white voters, maybe not to like the extent she may need to win, but she's definitely like competitive in Georgia, North Carolina, in the way that Biden wasn't. But those are kind of at this point don't look to be the ones that will decide the race. These 3 will, like Michigan, with Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And the kind of the state of play that was pushed, I think, by a lot of the centrist pundits who were really angry over Josh Shapiro not being picked was there was an assumption that Wisconsin and Michigan were kind of leaning towards her, like kind of solid for her, but that Pennsylvania would be the one that would decide the race. There was tons of focus on Pennsylvania, a lot of polling there compared to other places. And her, like, when we got like a trillion polls there, and they all showed either like basically a tied race or one with her up by like 3 or 4 points. And that's kind of a variance you'd expect if she was leading in that state. So, like, I think coming out of the debate when like the race kind of stabilized a little bit in her favor, she looked to be on a solid path to getting 270 electoral votes. And that was kind of, I wrote an article like last month that I've promoted a lot and I still fundamentally do believe in, that said like the race I don't think was a toss up. I don't think it's 50. I didn't think, and I still kind of don't think it's 50-50 in the way that people have like kind of just defaulted to saying it is.
Yeah.
But that
Wait,
rely
but wait,
that
can
yeah,
we stop for a second? So
yeah, sure.
your analysis on this, or your confidence on on this, comes from your special elections coverage, right? Like
Yeah.
you're looking at special elections, and you're looking at like active voters, like
Yeah,
real
the
enthusiastic voters, and
mhm.
how and you know, normal, I guess, in air quotes, voters, and how they participate in these other like off-season elections,
Yeah.
which heavily favor the Democrats. Even the midterms in 2022 also showed
Yeah.
a lot of motion for the Democratic Party at a time when, like, if you just simply looked at the living circumstances and how primaries are supposed to work as like a approval rating for the administration, at a time when they're experiencing negative real wage growth, like, it was expected that there would have been a red wave,
Yeah.
and yet that did not happen. Um,
Yeah. Democrats won at least one race, like a major race, a governor or senate race. They won at least one race in all 6 of these states. North Carolina didn't have any statewide elections in 2022, but they won the Senate race in Georgia. They won the Senate and governor's race in Arizona. They won all the governor's races in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Or they did lose the Senate race in Wisconsin and the governor's race in Georgia. But what was really encouraging for them, and what I thought like would put them in a solid position, what I still am kind of leaning on, is that their results in 2022, and yeah, the polls were accurate in 2022. That is something somebody mentioned that, and I think that that's worth considering. I'll get into like the idea. There's sort of a cope on the right that the polling is biased against Trump, and that Kamala only having a small lead means that Trump is guaranteed to win by a large margin, but that's not true. At least that's not guaranteed to happen. It's not any more likely. Yeah, polls. Oh, you don't know that they'll be more accurate, whatever. But so specifically, the results in the 3 Midwestern states here were very, very strong for Democrats, even compared to the rest of the country. They won all the statewide elections in Michigan by double digits or close to double digits. They won the governor's race in Pennsylvania by 15 points. The Feder Chud won by 5 in his Senate race, which I thought was a really like kind of like stunning result. They won the governor's race in Wisconsin by 3, and in the Senate race in Wisconsin against an incumbent who has won 2 terms, Ron Johnson, uh, they only lost that race by 1 point while running a very left-wing candidate there, Mandela Barnes. I don't know if you're like familiar with him, but he was
yeah.
one of the more left-wing candidates of 2022, and I thought he did very well given the circumstances. They, especially since he was very underfunded, they,
Well, the
uh,
Democratic Party had different priorities at that time.
yeah,
They had to funnel as much money as possible to like races that
yeah,
they were going to lose by 20 points on, you
yeah,
know.
in Florida. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, 2022 is before Gaza, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So that could be a factor. But I mean, at the same time, one interesting thing in Michigan is that in Whitmer's race, when she won by 11 points, she actually saw some slippage in the Muslim areas in Dearborn and Hamtramck, Hamtramck, however it's pronounced. But that wasn't because of Gaza. It was actually over social issues because there are a lot of like conservative kind of imams who have a lot of influence in
Yeah.
those areas who didn't like that she was more pro LGBT and pro
Important
trans.
to important note to add in electoral trivia is that a lot of the Muslim population in the United States of America pre 9/11 was definitely, at least, like, I can't speak on their conservative social values, but certainly were resilient Republican voters.
Yeah,
And
they voted
post
for
9/11, they swung heavily in the Democratic Party's direction for understandable reasons.
Yeah, but they were sort of an interesting part of the coalition that was definitely over cultural stuff, foreign policy, because Democrats were less pro-Iraq war. There was a anti-interventionist tendency among mainstream liberals back in the 2000s that you don't see now in the party in a way. Like a lot of the shit that like people people got angry at Noah Cohen the other week because they said like, oh, they're spending all the money in Israel, but they're not spending any to help with the hurricane disaster relief. They're like, oh no, that's conspiratorial thinking. You can't say that. That's the shit Obama said in 2008. He was running on like let me be clear. We need to do regime change at home, and we need to do nation building in Detroit instead of in Afghanistan. Like that was basic liberal kind of ideology. And then I think
Yeah.
with Biden, who is kind of an ideological Cold Warrior neoliberal, who he's really embraced these people, and I would say in a way because the way that he's connected Trump and liberal like disdain and anger towards Trump as part of a larger neoconservative interventionist foreign policy thing where he like will explicitly talk about fighting Putin and Hamas and Trump as one of the same thing. That tendency that used to exist among liberals to be less interventionist is not the case now. There's at the elite level, there's been a
Oh,
substantial shift.
you mean
Yeah,
to say something here. You're talking about the Democratic Party. You're not talking about the
yeah.
base of support
No, not
overall.
the base at all. No,
Yeah,
not the base at
the
all.
base certainly, even amongst I would say the Republican Party base of support, has never been like has never been as invested in like no wars as they have now. Like I would say
Yeah,
that even the Republicans, for one reason or another, I think like mainstream media will cover it as like they are pro Putin, but even in terms of like Ukraine, and definitely a similar attitude exists for Gaza as well, where they're just like, I don't want this shit. Like I don't want to hear about it. At least I don't want to hear about it. Like I don't want it to keep
yeah,
happening, and I don't want my tax dollars going to it, is the prevailing attitude, I would say, broadly, which Donald Trump, I think, expertly captured in 2016 as he presented himself as a peaceful dove against Hillary Clinton, that he
yeah,
successfully, with not much, not much momentum, he didn't really need to do too much, successfully presented Hillary Clinton as a warmonger, which she was. Now,
yeah.
they're trying to do that right now, but the Trump administration, I mean, the Trump campaign is like woefully of the Democratic Party. If he didn't
Yeah,
have like the January 6th stink on him, if he wasn't seen as like such a narcissistic loser, if people didn't remember some of the worst aspects of his administration, there would be no question right now as to who is winning the race. It would
yeah. There was
absolutely
I
be the
remember
Republican Party.
one poll that really sticks with me from last year is there was a poll that showed like Haley leading Biden by 20 points, which but at the same time there was also a poll that showed um, uh, Kamala leading Vance by 21 that was last month. So I think moderate republicanism nationally is uh, can be very popular. I am a little skeptical, and I'm going to write something about this soon. That people explicitly trying to model themselves. Kamala leading Vance by 21 that was last month. So I think moderate republicanism nationally is uh, can be very popular. I am a little skeptical, and I'm going to write something about this soon. That people explicitly trying to model themselves after Trump. I don't even if they aren't Trump, I don't think that they might do well because Trump, and we've seen this in polling recently, has an advantage over a lot of other Republicans in that people see him as experienced and a strong leader in the way that someone like Kerry Lake or even DeSantis doesn't really poll well. So, strangely enough, and contrary to a lot of conventional wisdom, we've seen at the Senate level a lot of the Trump acolytes have polled a lot worse than him, despite kind of hypothetically maybe being more palatable in their background because they lack the credibility and experience that people think Trump has, which I think is something that people didn't really expect and could be a big problem for them long term.
someone trying to do Trumpism without having Trump's motion is Ron DeSantis, and we all know how that went at the national
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah. So,
So
anyways,
yeah, no,
yeah.
Trump is white man's Barack Obama in that respect. Like, if you put a Pete Buttigieg style person out there, or if you put like um, a Josh Shapiro trying to present themselves as Barack Obama, literally, uh, but failing to be Barack Obama, I think people are not going to respond positively to that in the way that they did to Barack Obama himself.
Yeah. I mean, Shapiro does have a very strong electoral record, which is kind of a wrinkle in that. But I mean, DeSantis did too, and we saw how that went. But basically, going back to what I
But
said about
I'm talking
2020,
about
yeah.
like Shapiro and nationally.
Oh yeah, yeah. I could
I
see
feel like
that. He faced
especially
a
if you
very, very weak opponent.
yeah, especially with like when you consider like the same shitty middle of the road neoliberal policies that you put forward, like if your agenda package is not even remotely addressing the concerns of the broader electorate, you know, the middle class,
Hmm.
I feel like you're just not going to be able to communicate that in a successful way unless you're a once in a lifetime charismatic leader like Barack Obama.
Yeah, or Joe Biden, obviously. But yeah. But so kind of going back to what I was saying, that this is why I would still say I think that she just is going purely fundamentals, nothing about what her campaign is like now. I don't think that she's running a good campaign whatsoever. I really disagree with a lot of her decisions. I think her people are inept and don't deserve trust. But basically in 2022 we saw these very, very strong results for Democrats in these three Midwestern states where they won statewide races at least some level in all three. And we the causal reason for that, which is this went against expectations that people had, that the Rust Belt would trend to the right over time. After 2016, this was kind of a different like direction than people expected. uh the main reason for that is abortion and social issues. For whatever, like what people miss about these three states up here, the white voters in these states, even the moderates, is that they are largely socially liberal, pro-abortion, uh, like not necessarily too like crazy about trans issues, not very evangelical like white voters are in the South. So we have seen like lasting Democratic strength with crackers in the North, not really in the South. They've had issues with rural voters in the South, but in the North they've remained strong. So that provides Kamala a path if Trump can't really do particularly well with like non-white voters, rural Southern voters, voters nationally in general. Um, she could still win in these states and win the election by holding strong with white voters in these areas. That is what polling has sort of shown, and I'm going to get to the Washington primary. The real heads are going to know about this. Um, this is kind of like a bit of a cheat sheet for the election ahead of time. For the past number, basically, the case here is that, and I'm going to the split ticket page for this, um, which is they're a very good website that have a lot of detailed analysis for elections like this. Since 2018 or so, the primary elections in Washington, like Washington in the chat, Rise Up, um, the way Washington holds its primaries is
This is your
that,
13 keys, the Washington
yeah,
primary.
this is my Alan Lickman shit. This is like what I'm on. Uh, but it's real. It's not like 13 keys. But from 2018 onward, what we've seen in Washington in August, Washington has basically a preliminary general election where they have both candidates of both parties on the ballot in a jungle primary where voters of both parties vote in the same ballot line and essentially hold like the election for congressional and statewide races beforehand. I'll zoom in a little bit more here. And so you can tally up all the results of all the candidates in all these races, and you can get kind of a statewide result in Washington months before the rest of the country. And Washington is a bluer state than the rest of America, is always going to vote Democratic, has voted Democratic in all these years. But you can, if you shift the results to the right, kind of to the same extent that um, Washington is blue, you can see how the extent that Washington is blue in these elections maps closely, and at least since 2018, to what the national environment will be like. So in 2018, Democrats did very well, which corresponded to them doing very well nationally. In 2020, this was contrary to polling, which showed Democrats leading in a landslide. They did a lot worse than 2018. They only won in Washington by 14 points, which what do you mean you hate this? This is real shit. Shut up. In 2020, they only won Washington by a margin that would indicate them only winning nationally by a small degree. And that's what happened, which was contrary to what polling showed. The polling at the time of August 2020, incorrectly showed a very strong uh,
Democratic
lead. Yeah, and it
Yeah.
was wrong. Then 2 years later, you see in 2022, Democrats win in Washington roughly by 10. This goes against the consensus that people have then that it'll be a Republican blowout. This isn't a really good result for Democrats, but it indicates roughly a neutral year. Like this is represents about a 2 point Republican lead, and then they end up winning by two. So if you want to be very rough at this, you can just say 2018 onwards, you subtract 12 or 13 points from the Washington results, and that's basically what you get nationally. The thing that was really um, noticeable about 2024, if you notice here, this is the best result Democrats in 2024 this year, this August. Democrats had the best result in the Washington primary they've seen since 2018, and the second best result they've had since 2008. Their numbers in 2024 were 2 points better than what they got in 2020, which was the year that they won nationally. So if you go purely off of this, if you do the very rough 12-point shift, this would indicate a year where Democrats win by roughly 4 points in the like they have a 4-point advantage in the generic ballot. So if that would be in that, which is that would be about enough for Kamala to win, not by a huge margin, but by enough to win probably most of the swing states, over 270 electoral votes. This isn't like very complicated or grasping for straws. It's just taking the amount that Washington is, and this is going to get more insane soon. This is taking the amount that Washington voted for Democrats, shifting it about to how much Washington leans Democratic relative to the country, and you get something close to the national result here. So what this indicates is like the country leaning more Democratic than it did in 2020.
Yeah. No, this is post 2018, not 2016.
Yeah, 2016 is a different case, and we'll get to that in a bit. And there's another way of analyzing it that actually looks even better for Democrats that accounts for 2016 kind of being a bit off here.
So, so the thing I'm looking at that is worrisome, I guess, is the reality that Joe Biden won by +2, right? Like Joe Biden underperformed the polls.
He won by 4.5. This is the congressional ballot.
Oh, the congressional ballot. Okay, he won by 4.5.
Yeah.
The problem with Joe Biden, I think, and the thing that Kamala Harris doesn't have is the reality that, like, I think 46% of the broader electorate consider Kamala Harris to be too liberal.
Yeah.
And why do they consider that? It's because she's a black woman. Like, not to get all MSNBC on everyone's asses here, but that's the reason why they're saying that, right?
That's the heuristic people have. I'd agree with that. And it's in a sense that does make me kind of understand why she's trying to play the dissenter a bit more. I think that she could do it a bit more like intelligently, but the basic idea I sort of do get, because she's like, as far as voters are concerned, she's kind of already maxed out her liberal points on account of being a black woman. But at the same time, there are liberal policies that are just popular. So, like, there's a give and take here, and I don't agree with a lot of what. Like, you don't need to do a rally with Liz Cheney. You just need to kind of present yourself like a strong leader, which is the problem that people have.
Yeah, and I think more important than that, she needs to stand on. She needs to identify what the problems are that many Americans are facing, and address those problems with like direct policy prescriptions. One aspect of this campaign that was fairly successful early on that caught me by surprise even was Kamala Harris putting forward the notion that she would tackle price gouging for
Yeah.
grocery prices. This policy has been relatively resilient, regardless of the consistent counter messaging from the Trump administration. It's actually only grown in popularity,
Yeah.
and it shows up in polling as
Yeah.
well. When independently polled on Kamala Harris's like tackling price gouging, which I think was like very effectively communicating a policy that Americans would otherwise be like very against, price
Yeah.
caps, like price controls. They were very much on board with it when it was represented as tackling price gouging.
Yeah.
And
People loved it
uh,
when Nixon did it. People loved the original, like in like the 70s. People loved that shit. It made him
yeah,
very popular.
so that's the thing that I look to. Like, there was another poll I saw recently that showed, I think, like when asked the same exact group, two different questions of the same exact policy, Americans were very much on board when you said Kamala
Mhm.
Harris is going to tackle price gouging. It was profoundly popular. When they
Yeah,
asked,
that's an excellent point I thought you made the other day. Yeah.
yeah, when asked about the exact same issue with negative framing, like framing that Americans are primed to feel is negative, price caps, they found it to be profoundly unpopular.
Yeah.
And that's the point that a lot of Americans should understand, but they choose not to for some reason. I think our media diet contributes to that, which is that here I'm trying to pull up that data right now. I don't know
Yeah.
where it is, but
Yeah,
but
this is very consistent, and it gets to the point that, like you said, people will disagree, um, like, will have completely different views on the same policies depending on how it's framed. Public opinion is a lot more malleable than people think, not even in the sense that you can outright, change people's minds, but you can make something that would otherwise be unpopular sound popular if you present it the right way. That's
yeah.
just yeah, surrendering to your opponent's framing is the quickest way to lose if you want.
Yeah, there's so many examples of this. Someone in the chat brought this up as well. It's Affordable Act versus Obamacare. And also,
Yeah.
the other thing that I brought up was about polling. Whenever someone asks me about polls, I always point out to the reality that American voters believe things fundamentally at odds with one another. This is why party messaging on issues matter quite a bit. If you concede to the right wing framing on immigration, you lose. And obviously, that poll showed it was Asian Americans and how they see immigration. 73% of Asian Americans say allowing immigrants who came to the country illegally as children to remain in the U.S. and apply for legal status is an important policy goal. 64% say creating a way for most immigrants currently in the country illegally to stay here legally is an important goal. While simultaneously, 62% say increasing deportations of immigrants currently in the country illegally is an important goal. So that's what it is. Like
It's just framing, yeah. People are not as ideological as people in DC like to think. People, I would say, like, or especially right wingers in DC. I had a friend who made a very good point about this yesterday. A lot of people at the top level of the Democratic Party just straight up agree with Republicans on a lot of things, and they will
yes.
use these kind of contradictory polling things to say, as a matter of fact, that they need to go in this one direction. But that's not ever clear. You can, if you really wanted to, you could absolutely change, like, the way, just like, you don't need to surrender on this stuff. It is not at all fixed, and
Yeah,
to get
you're
to a
talking about the trans issues one, right? That's another one that I
yeah,
brought forward. Yeah, I talked about.
that's her s that's
There's Pew
yeah,
polling on this. Americans are generally very much pro-trans, or by overwhelming margins, margins that like would normally go towards the Republican Party, say that trans people are discriminated against severely,
yeah,
right? Like that's an important fact to remember when talking about trans issues. And you can
yeah,
also always point to the 2022 electoral defeat from the
mhm,
Republican Party, especially in races where they heavily leaned on the trans stuff, which is
yeah,
hilarious because like they are
yeah,
still heavily leaning on that. They're pumping ads with like Kamala Harris's for the they them.
yeah.
Um,
In Ohio, the closest Senate race in the country, where a Democrat, by the way, is leading, Sherrod Brown. I read of like there's this one huge Republican PAC. Every single ad they have run in Ohio from over like the past 2 months has been about trans issues, and this is not because it works for them. And I want everybody like in the chat who may be transgender to hear this because they want people to think that they want you to think that people hate you and they don't. There was a poll by Fox News that tested Kamala versus Trump in every single issue. Kamala's second best issue out of every single one, tied with abortion, was trans rights. She was
Yeah.
plus 16 on trans rights. And at the same time, Trump's second best issue, tied with immigration, was Israel. The actual reality and
Yeah.
how people, the DC Democrats think it is completely at odds. It could not be like further apart. It's a complete inversion of what the actual reality is.
Yeah, the less you talk about a particular issue, the more Americans fantasize about like how good your opinion will be on that issue, especially if
Yeah.
you're on their team. That's the way that's kind of the way it works.
Yeah, it's just it's baffling to me that like because you still see like Democratic consultants saying shit like to like anonymously like, oh, that ad is so tough, like they're killing us with that ad. You can only really think that like the they them ad is hard, like hurts Kamala if like you legitimately believe with what that ad is saying. That's the only way I can explain it. Because and I've gone over this in like a big article last year, and I'm going to go over it soon in the series that I'm putting out with Felix. I'm not Felix, but I am doing a series with him. Um, there is no, I cannot think, and I've studied this extensively. I can't tell you a single election where really hardline anti-trans stuff has actually not even like helped them win, but has won at all. They lost in Kentucky on this twice. They've lost countless ballot measures on this. When they pushed it in 2020,
Yeah.
they lost. When they pushed it further in 2022, they did even worse. When they like are pushing it now in 2024, like, and I'll like say this if it happens, they could very well lose an election against one of the most historically unpopular presidents in history after generationally high inflation, generationally high interest rates, almost entirely because they are so alienating on social issues. And trans stuff is a huge part of that because they've made it a huge part of it. And I understand it's hard being the target, but like, and that's like awful, but they're not winning. They aren't winning off of this. And if Democrats just fucking wake up to basic shit like polling on this, polling on Palestine, which I really want to get to in like a second, like centrists really want you to think that there is always some huge gap between what you want and what is achievable, and that does not exist. They just
Yeah.
want that to be the case, and they make it the case.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You're absolutely right on this. It is really really stupid. Even though they're hammering on the anti-trans shit. Apparently, there's another trans-focused GOP ad hitting the television. Cruz a super PAC with a disabled veteran warning that Colin Allred wants taxpayers to pay for sex change operations in the military, even on kids.
All of his shit has been about this in Texas, and he's like he was losing in a poll last month in
Yeah,
Texas.
I don't know if they're like doing this as a way to prime the base into making the trans issues like a very important part of the culture war. But as it stands currently, and that might be a gamble that works out in the future, but as it stands currently, most people like the average American thinks trans people are weird, but not so much that they literally will go out and vote against like anti-trans bills or whatever. They just don't care about it enough. It's not a motivator. It's not top priority at all for them in the way that the Republican Party presents the issue. If it was, then in 2016, Donald Trump wouldn't have won on a pro-trans, like openly pro-trans campaign and had criticized the North Carolina bathroom bill. That
said
was
that
a
Caitlyn
major.
Jenner could use any bathroom in Trump Tower that she wanted.
Yeah. It was a major misstep by the Republican Party, which caused them to go back to the drawing board, and then they had to tie trans existence to something else that Americans actually do care about, which is like fairness in sports, or something that Americans still consider to be like one of the last bastions of meritocracy, sports. That's the only way that they could motivate people to even care or respond to polls in a negative manner about trans people. Yet Democrats, I think, see that and think, oh yeah, we have to like slaughter at least 30% of the trans, 30% of the trans community in order to get these guys to be on board with us.
Yeah, and I mean, they've been presenting the kids in sports stuff like a new thing for years. They first started trying that in 2019. It didn't work then. They tried it in 2020. They explicitly said, "Well, we failed in North Carolina because of the bathroom bills. People don't care about trans adults. Oh, but trans kids, we have an angle on this." They've been promising they've had an angle on this for like half a decade at this point. And I would say that the only reason it's gone like become such a big part of their platform isn't because it's some killer issue. There's no proof of that. It's they just don't have any fucking ideas. And they are personally the right-wing people who go to these Christian schools and are personally ideologically obsessed about this. They are the ones who want this to be a big issue.
Yeah.
The Matt Walshes and Shea Reichiks of the world, these social media people, they aren't like just people supporting the party. They are the party. And they're like Michael Knowles. These people are very, very dedicated to the idea of this like patriarchal normative social structure. They see trans people like as, oh, I got an ad on here. They see trans people as a big like threat to that, and they want to do this crusade because they think it's important. The priority is not winning; it is like pushing this thing that they think is a threat to existence itself.
Absolutely. And I think like you can genuinely figure out how fucking online someone is by how much value they or how much emphasis they place on like dominating trans people. And you've
I
seen
am
this
sub.
like
I just wasn't logged in.
you have you see this with even the likes of like Anna Kasparian and whatnot who've like fallen down the right wing rabbit hole on this framing on trans shit, instead of just like deflecting away by being like, this is silly weird stuff. Weird was a great counter to all of this. I wish they still
Yeah.
had that in their fucking in their
Yeah.
tool belt.
Yeah, the guy, like I'm certain you've talked about this, but like they had that CNN article where that guy Geoff Garin went to Kamala after the first week, and they were like, "Oh, great job so far." Like this is a former Biden pollster where he said like, "But don't say we're not going back. You need to focus more on the future and stop saying weird because it's too negative." They've stopped using both of those things, and that guy Geoff Garin is currently still working for the campaign. He was not fired on the spot for that.
Yeah. Yeah, Christopher Rufo.
Yeah, Chris Rufo is a fucking like he's like Godric. He thinks he's Godric the Grafted.
Yeah. All right, but getting back to the matter at hand. Here's
Yeah.
what I think, okay? Here's what my fears are. Kamala Harris is not Joe Biden in the way that like the broader electorate views her because she's a black woman. Now, the more she runs to the Joe Biden constituency, the more she tries to like rebuild the Joe Biden coalition by saying she's Joe Biden, that she has no differences between her and Joe Biden. I think I think this is a risky gamble. Like, if you lock down the Brandon coalition, sure. I mean, it won against Donald Trump in 2020. You could technically win against Donald Trump again. I, however, believe that given her background, given the fact that she's a black woman, she's going to have a harder time with that, which is why I always thought that it would be much more successful if she went after the 2008 Barack Obama coalition and try to take advantage of the momentum when all eyes were on her. She did not redefine herself or reshape her policy at all, and just basically brought the same Brandon team back on board, and they've been running the same branding campaign this entire time. I think this is risky. Like, I think this is a very risky bargain for the very risky gamble for Kamala Harris. And
It's risky is putting it nicely. It's fucking moronic.
no, it is moronic. But I'm just saying it's not only moronic, but it's also, it might cost her the election, is what I'm saying. And I've been a believer. I've been telling liberals, like, listen, don't worry, Kamala Harris is still most likely going to win. But as time goes on, and the more I see her in media, the more I see her, the more I see her going out and being like, "Oh, I love Joe Biden. I'm going to be exactly like him." It shows me that they have the worst instincts possible on this.
Yeah.
And it feels like they might still end up, losing this election to a historically unpopular candidate. On the other side, I track a lot of Trump's movement, And I think he's trying to get every low propensity voter possible, every conspiratorial nut job that normally
Yeah.
doesn't go out, that doesn't get a lot of representation in polls, to go out and vote for him. Now, will that gamble pay off for him? I don't know, but I do think
It,
it's a
it,
smart
it's
move from
I
them at
actually would
least.
disagree with that.
What?
I disagree with that. It's a smart move. I think, in my opinion, he's chasing ghosts here, because the whole mythology that they have around, like that Trump has around these, what they call target persuadables, these young men like the Aiden Ross fans that they think are going to turn out and like win them every single
No.
election from
No, no,
now
no.
on.
I wait, can I reframe my statement?
Yeah,
I'm saying
sure.
it's a smart move for him because he's locked down his constituency. So
Yeah,
if you've already reached your limit in popularity and unpopularity, and polls are not swinging in any direction for you, right?
yeah,
You have to go after voters that might not be represented at the polls or did not have the opportunity to vote for you last time around because they were too young, especially when you are seemingly more popular in this demographic.
yeah.
And that's why I'm saying it's smart, in the sense that, like, obviously the smarter move would be for Trump to be able to moderate himself and not come across like a fucking asshole, like a narcissistic baby that reminds people every fucking second that, like, he's gonna cheat or lie or refuse to concede, because that's an issue that a lot of Americans do care about, at least voters, like older voters.
Mhm.
Or that he is going like full tilt right wing on immigration, so much so that 60% of Americans want mass deportation, but they still find Trump's like cats and dogs statements about the Haitians to be
Yeah,
gross and weird and completely out of control. If
yeah.
he wasn't doing that shit, that would be the smart way for him to campaign, just like be a normal Republican. But he can't do that. But I'm saying, with the current confines and the current limitations, is at least like smart to try to eke out any kind of voter you can. And those are the only remaining spaces I think that he can tap into.
Yeah, but I think like the base they're like to that extent I think on the very small margins that may work. But the larger issue for them is that they kind of fundamentally don't understand the way that the election, and this goes back to, well, oh, Dave Wasserman has me blocked. So yeah, the propensity stuff.
Yeah, Trump's best bet
Um
remains high turnout of less engaged voters. Among voters who always show up, Harris still leads by 4, but among low to mid propensity, Trump's back up to a 52 to 45 lead.
yeah, that's why you need Chad, you have to want turnout to be as low as possible. You do not want high turnout. The lower the turnout is, the better it is for Democrats. Like it has come full circle. The conventional wisdom is completely wrong here. But yeah, we've seen that consistently. But and this is something that I went into in the article I published actually earlier today, like a guide to right wing cope, like about the election, a guide like to why the stuff that people say that yeah, it is sad that like low turnout is not good for Republicans, because they have all the weird conspiratorial freaks like who only turn out like when there's very high turnout are better for them. So you want lower turnout because all the really engaged libos, like who are like have 5 PhDs and vote in every election, love Democrats now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyways, the mythology about like these like these people the polls can't pick up, the presumptions people have that the polls will be wrong in a way that benefits Trump. This is a point that I'd go against as to why people should be less pessimistic, although he obviously can still win. But this is something people shouldn't assume. Uh, in 2020, the polls were off by a lot because Biden leaning liberal voters responded to pollsters a lot more than Trump pollsters did. And people assume that this was just a case of people really not having trust for authority, like this deep rot, like the core of like America, where people weren't even willing to talk the news at all anymore. But a big reason for that in 2020 was probably just that COVID was going on and liberals were stuck inside while conservatives were out and about, and liberals didn't have anything going on, so they just answered every phone call. That's not the case anymore. And then, and 2 years later, it wasn't the case. The pandemic was over, so polling was mostly accurate. So I would think that that's a reason to assume that polling will be decent this year, and that the idea that there's like the reason why polls were off in 2020 was that there's just this big untapped like people who are off the grid and love Trump. Uh, it's more mythology that I think it has been like confirmed.
Yeah. Um. Okay. So the question I have, I guess, is the way I see it right now. If
Hmm.
low propensity voters do turn out, uh, Trump might actually win
Yeah.
in these in these key states, in key districts, specifically thinking about Pennsylvania. If they
Hmm.
don't, then Kamala Harris has a good opportunity.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Also, beyond that, I think there's the other side of this equation where there's a lot of voters that would absolutely be willing and able to go out and vote for Kamala Harris that refuse to do so
Hmm.
because I think she has abandoned them. Like she has an
Yeah.
opportunity to also activate, especially within the coalition that Democrats have always had, right? Uh, for example, like black and brown voters, younger voters in general. There's a lot of there are a lot of people who are choosing to, stay on the couch instead of going out and voting for the Democratic
Hmm.
Party. I think a big chunk of these voters that she is just casting aside because she's doing the Joe Biden, the Joe Biden strategy, basically, which people must remember happened at an unprecedented time when there was universal ballot registration, mail-in ballot, like that greatly improved the numbers in terms of turnout because of ease of access, right?
Hmm.
So I don't even know if like those numbers are the best numbers to look at in terms of like how this election is going to look like. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that she's leaving behind, and one of the immediate gains that she could make, and I don't even know if it's probably too late at this point, but like one of the immediate gains that she could have made was if she had separated herself from the Biden administration
Yeah.
in the most politically feasible way, by at least like taking a more hardline approach to Israel and maybe utilizing the current utilizing the current attention that she has, or the attention that she got as she became the I'm swapping screens so you don't have to expose your
Yeah.
Google search or whatever. But I don't,
Yeah. Here we go.
she did not do that. And there are a shit ton of people. There are a shit ton of people that would vote for her with no downsides whatsoever.
Yeah, this is something that I always cite as much as possible. This is something everybody in chat commit this to memory. Use this like for every single like like argument you ever have. Use this like cite this at every single chance you have. Um, this was a poll in July by Split Ticket. The other like what I was previously citing before. Yeah, note this, note it, write it on your hand in blood, and like never forget it. They tested the generic ballot polling for Congress um, between like Democrats and Republicans based on different policy positions that they had, and it wasn't just on this. It was like on stuff you'd expect. They had this where a Democrat, who a Republican who says that uh, Trump didn't lose the election, that Trump did lose the election, does a lot better than one that says the election was stolen. But this and the guy who um, uh, what's it called, sponsored this. He said he didn't even expect this. They found like in general generic Democrats were leading by 3. If you said that the Democrats and the Republicans agree with Israel's current approach, the margin goes from +3 to even, and there's a huge number of undecideds that go up. People like independents and non-voters who are turned off from the Democrat by this. The Republican goes down by a little bit, and the Democrat goes down by even more. But if they asked were the Republican who agrees with what Israel's doing and a Democrat who supports an immediate ceasefire and halt of military aids and arms sales, so not just a ceasefire, not just we're working tirelessly for a ceasefire, we're working tirelessly to like end the war and get the hostages home, a halt for military aids and arms sales, an arms embargo, those they win by 6. They win by double the generic ballot. So we have discernible proof that breaking from Biden on this particular issue where it is the worst polling of all of his issues. He polls worse on Israel than he does on inflation, on the economy, on immigration. There was at some points where he was like had below 30% approval on Israel, Palestine. If Democrats break from that in a way that like is seen as a total non-starter in Washington, they win over independents and they win over non-voters. So it's not just leftists. It's not just people who are Palestinian or no Palestinian or young voters are very committed to this issue. It's not just this question of do you care about Palestine? Palestine fits in with a larger issue with Biden, which is that he's seen as completely incompetent, elderly, and incapable of like um, governing the country. That he's not an effective president. So it's not just that they think that Israel's killing too many people, that they know everything about like the 1948 UN agreement, and that they know everything about the apartheid or whatever's going on there. They see this as a reflection of Biden being inept, and they want to vote for Democrats otherwise because they don't like Republicans. But if you break from him on this issue, you lose nothing. You
Yeah.
lose nothing. There were some polls that showed Democratic voters outright disapproving of Biden on Gaza. That should be impossible for an incumbent Democratic president. This is just something that is turned into a heuristic for Biden being an incompetent. And Democrats sticking with that doesn't gain you anything other than maybe some money from donors that she doesn't need because she's raised over $1 billion in
Yeah.
small dollar donations, and turns off a lot of people because you connect yourself to somebody who is regarded by the public to be a failed president.
Yeah. Every time she says I'm just like Joe Biden, I think she's just hemorrhaging support. Like, I think she thinks she's gaining in the suburbs, and to a certain degree she might be, right? But that's a tricky gambit, like I said, because a lot of those people might not end up voting for you. The Nikki Haley constituency comes to mind, right? Like, Nikki Haley is firmly committed to Donald Trump.
I'm going to say something that may sound batshit. I would say that she probably is alienating Nikki Haley voters who might be open to her by sticking with Israel compared to if she broke from Israel. The reason why Nikki Haley was appealing to these swing voters wasn't because those people are ideological neocons. It's because they wanted somebody who was seen as competent and effective. Nikki Haley was seen as young, competent, and effective. Biden was seen as old, incompetent, and ineffective. If she broke from Biden on this issue, it wouldn't cause Nikki Haley people being like, "Oh, she loses Zionist points and my internal like fucking like Homo economicus like judgment of what these candidates are." They'll see, "Oh, she's a strong, independent candidate who's breaking from this person I don't like. That she reminds me of Nikki Haley," and they'll vote for her. Those people will probably be more compelled to vote for her compared all the rallies that you can do with Liz Cheney and fucking like picking up all the endorsements from her dad or like fucking John Bolton or whatever. That is going to get you nothing when getting people to think that you are an effective person who is broken from somebody who is seen as a generationally failed president will make you look effective and strong. And you will gain those voters who are swinging on that issue of competency.
No, absolutely. Dog, what strawman is he imagining? No, I fully understand exactly where Edinger Mendham is coming from. He's completely correct on this. One of Biden's biggest advantages when he was running for president against Donald Trump was that he was going to restore America's position as the global hegemonic leader, and that he was going to take the world away from the chaos that Donald Trump presented with like European leaders laughing at him and shit like that. And then the last year of his presidency has been the entire world recognizing that this old man, this old feeble fucking buffoon is getting dog walked by his attack dog. That is the reason why Donald Trump was leading on the issue of Israel in a country where the overwhelming majority want a ceasefire and maybe even arms transfers being halted. They still thought Donald Trump was 30 points better than Joe Biden because he wasn't the fucking president, and Joe Biden was getting cumstered and dumpstered by Netanyahu that hard. It wasn't necessarily just about the moral considerations of like backing an apartheid regime that is currently engaging in a genocide. It was also the fact that he looked like a fucking idiot. He kept doing those like leaks.
His entire presidency, he looks inept and lost.
Yeah, Americans kind of shoot from the hip a little bit when it comes to this sort of stuff, where they just look at an old feeble man getting dog walked by a country that should be infinitely more grateful to us, And they don't like that. They're like, what the fuck is going on here? You look like a jackass when
Hillary.
you say I have a red line on Rafah, and then Benjamin Netanyahu the next day invades Rafah, and then you turn around and give him another $9 billion weapons package.
Yeah,
It
it
just
goes
looks
directly.
weak. They want a
It goes
strong leader.
directly against his initial appeal in 2020. And there was a Gallup poll recently that did make me a little nervous about this because and I'll get to that in a second. But Biden's strength and what was a compelling appeal at the time, and I recognized at the time that it was a compelling appeal, he was one of the longest serving senators in the history of the U.S. Senate. He was vice president for two terms. He was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Trump, people were terrified about being this inept, guy who had no clue what he was doing. Biden's central appeal was that he was supposed to be the adult in the room, that he
Yes.
was a decisive, competent leader. Hillary actually beat Trump on that, but she lost because she was seen as untrustworthy. Biden was in 2020, he was in kind of like this Goldilocks zone where, and this was how he was able to beat an incumbent, where he was seen as both more trustworthy than Trump, and he was seen as more effective and competent and a stronger leader than him. What happened over the course of his presidency, when they did the polls in 2024, Biden was still seen as more likable than Trump. He was still seen as a more moral person. He's still seen as more personally affable and trustworthy. But he had been killed. He had lost all of his support on the basis of being a strong leader. That was what was causing him to lose. He was seen as a weak figurehead. Kamala Harris in the Gallup poll that came out recently also led by an even larger margin than Biden did on being trustworthy, on being more well liked, on being somebody they'd be proud of to be president. But she's still losing by pretty double digit margins on being a strong leader. She's losing by 5 points on having a vision for the country, and she's losing by 10 points on being able to get things done because she has attached herself in a way that people don't want to somebody who is seen as, yeah, he was supposed to be a stoic statesman. She has attached herself, literally said that she wouldn't do anything different than somebody who is seen as completely asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. I
It's not
think
ideology, it's competence.
it also makes no sense because like she wouldn't be running for president right now if Biden was fucking killing it. So like
Yeah,
it's that simple. Politics can
yeah,
be as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. But the reality of the matter is Kamala Harris would not be currently running for president at the top of the ticket if Biden wasn't demonstrably so incompetent that he's like gonna lose the fucking race to Donald Trump.
yeah, yeah. And it's not about winning the election. It's not about wokage, whatever. It's not about at this point. I wouldn't even say that they think that this is a way that they can. Yeah, this is the poll that I was talking
Yeah,
about.
U.S. voters' impression of presidential candidates' personal qualities, like Kamala Harris netting 22 points in terms of being likable, having strong moral character, being honest and trustworthy. But when you get down to it, cares about the needs of people like you. It starts evening out a little bit, you know, with a 5 points. Is someone you would be proud of to have president? Manage the government effectively, 0. Would display judgment in a crisis, -1. Like these people think Donald Trump is more advantageous than Kamala Harris, like would do a better job of displaying judgment in a fucking crisis. That is directly, in my opinion, the communication strategy that you haven't harped on this. You have not shown the American voters how bad Trump would be even in a crisis situation. You haven't reminded
Yeah,
them of that.
yeah. They've
Yeah.
been trying to making fucking ads about fucking Bob Woodward's book like it's 2020.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll go back. I'll go back to kind of the main point I was making. So this is a reason to be a bit more hopeful, and then I'll go back to why this doesn't mean that she has it in the bag.
Okay.
So we talked about earlier, and this is some more math, about Washington in general, and I said that it only works as far back as 2018. But that, and people in Seattle here, this is your fault. That's because Seattle and Washington, Seattle is a very, very unique part of this country. There's not many areas in the rest of the country that look like Seattle. And it can very dramatically change the result of the state if it has high turnout or if it's swinging a lot to Democrats. So in 2016, Seattle swung a lot to Democrats, but Seattle was a very unique area, and so its swing there didn't really represent the rest of the country. So 2016, Democrats do relatively well in the Washington primary. That's mostly because they do very well in Seattle compared to previous years. That swing in Seattle is not represented in the rest of the country. It doesn't really indicate anything. So the Washington primary in that year is not a very predictive indicator. But in the rest of the state that's not Seattle, the rural part of Washington, like Vancouver, Spokane, like the kind of like Twin Peaks parts of the state, those areas are representative of the rest of the country. They have demographic splits here. You have they call it non-urban Washington. It's very white, like the rest, like the Midwest is. The white percentages are very similar. It's a bit less black. It's about as Hispanic, a bit more Asian, and a bit more Native American, and about as much college educated. It's actually less college educated than Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. But these Twin Peaks areas, that's what I'll call them now, Eastern Washington, um, not Seattle. These areas are representative of the rest of like the states you need to win. So what happens in 2016 is that even though Hillary improves on Obama's margin and like how Democrats did in 2012 statewide, the Democratic margin in the Twin Peaks areas of Washington among like the Black Lodge people, that number goes down even though the state goes to the left. The non-urban Washington zigs while the rest of the state zags in a sense. So this shift here kind of shows you that you can like it was kind of a canary in the coal mine for areas like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, because these areas were moving to the right compared to 2012. Uh, and so going off of that, you can sort of see that non-rural Washington, which is more Republican relative to the country, uh, is actually more a consistent predictive indicator of the country as a whole than Washington as a whole is, than like the whole state is when you include the kind of weird people in Seattle. So in Washington, so in 2016, you have the shift to the right that presages shifts to the right more generally. It presages a more Republican environment in general, and that is an indicator that Hillary is going to have a bad time in the Midwest, which she does, and she loses. 2018, Democrats make major gains in non-urban Washington. They actually win it outright. That corresponds with Democrats doing very well across the country, and specifically doing well in these white northern areas. They win Senate races in West Virginia, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania by very large margins. So here in this case, rural Washington swinging towards Democrats is predictive of Democrats doing well. In 2020, they don't do as well as they do in 2018, which indicates that they're not going to probably do as well in like the Midwest as they did in 2012 or in 2018, but they do a bit better, marginally better than they did in 2016. There's a leftward shift of about 3 points. Lo and behold, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania that year, you have those states move to the left slightly, not by a lot, not by as much as the polls were saying, but by enough to win. In 2022, you have it shift to the right by about as much as the country did. It's a pretty brutal margin, like worse than 2016, indicating probably, but it indicates about a neutral year. Then in the states, in the congressional elections in 2022, you have, as non-rural as rural Washington said, the Twin Peaks area said, the Democrats, like, it's basically neutral. This year, and this is what I think is extremely encouraging to Democrats, their numbers in 2024, right here, are the best numbers they've had in rural Washington since 2012. Better than 2020, substantially better than 2016. So this indicates like a national kind of environment that is once again to the left of 2020. There's no indication of a big right-wing surge in these rural working class white areas that we did see in 2016. If anything, it indicates a shift to the left among these areas, which would correspond perfectly with a national environment where Kamala does a little bit worse among non-whites, loses points in Florida, but like New York, California. Maybe her national popular vote margin is smaller, but she holds ground or maybe even gains ground among these socially liberal working class people who are put off by Trump's social conservatism. And what's very like encouraging for them is that the lean here, how much more Republican non-urban Washington relative to the country is, the lean has been increasing with time. So if you assume that like it's going to be about 10 points to the right of the country like it was in 2014 or 2022, or if you put somewhere in the middle of that, like in 2020, you have a Democratic victory margin between 4 and 5 points. That I think on Nate Silver's like kind of sheet that shows what's her odds of winning if she wins by X amount nationally, that would be a very, very likely win for her. And it corresponds with the polling that we've been seeing that shows a slight, consistent lead for her in these states she needs to win. Doesn't speak the strength of the Sun Belt. She could do terribly in the Sun Belt. Doesn't speak the strength in blue states. It does speak the strength.
You're specifically talking about
Yeah.
Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania non-urban voters, like white voters, predominantly white voters in these areas
Yeah.
that are more socially liberal than what the National Republican Party presents itself as.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
I
The problem
understand
here,
the method here.
Yeah. Going back to what we were saying before, this doesn't predict how Kamala Harris will doing. This predicts how Democrats will do. And we know that Democrats across the board, generic Democrats, that's what GCB means, generic congressional ballot, the average Democrat running for Senate or Congress are liked because they are not Joe Biden. They're not part of the Biden administration. They're
Yeah.
not 80 years old and they're not his underling.
I think they also can.
Yeah.
There's another thing that I always look to. I think there is another statement because, like, if you're running on a congressional ticket, you have to be more policy driven and more policy focused than this like overall vibes based attitude that like the top of the ticket can take advantage of. And I think that speaks to the down ballot performance of like Senate Democrats over Senate Republicans in states where Kamala does not have the same margin of victory.
Yeah, they're leading by 8 points, 7 points in Pennsylvania. They're winning by 5 in Wisconsin. They're leading in Ohio. They're leading in even in these Sun Belt states. Ruben Gallego is up by 10 in Arizona, where she's had her worst polling numbers in all the swing states. So the problem with her here is that this paints a strong picture for generic Democrats. Kamala Harris may not be a generic Democrat. She's Kamala Harris. She's part of the Biden administration. That was Biden's problem. That's why I never thought that Democrats necessarily doing well among these voters or in special elections. And this is, I think, a very useful thing because unlike special elections, this was relatively higher turnout. This was like 2 million people voted in this primary. It's not like where there's like 8% turnout in some like state house race. But if Kamala Harris can't succeed in getting people to view her more like a generic Democrat than she is as Kamala Harris, Joe Biden's vice president, then she might not be able to match the performance of the rest of the party. And you'll have people who would otherwise want to vote for Democrats being driven out of desperation, out of Kamala giving them nothing to hold on to, giving them no bone to hold, giving them no excuse to vote for her.
I'm confused. Are you
Yeah.
saying that consistently saying that you're prosecuting transnational gangs and that you love the opportunity economy and you have tears in your eyes whenever you talk about small businesses is not the winning message
No,
that
because
that
people
appeals to
don't.
white working class voters in these non-urban areas?
Yeah, people don't want American Keir Starmer. They want a Democrat. They want Bob Casey. They want Sherrod Brown. They want Tammy Baldwin, all of which have relatively progressive positions. Tammy Baldwin, the candidate running the two-term senator in Wisconsin, she supported Medicare for all her entire career. She opposed the Iraq War. She has positions that are a lot closer to Bernie Sanders than I'd say Joe Biden. And
Even
she is leading
even Sherrod
consistently
Brown
moving. Yeah, Sherrod Brown.
advocated to expand Medicare coverage to 55-year-olds, like
Yeah,
lower
he's a
the
big
eligibility
pro-union
age.
Yeah, he's always been very like protectionist, like pro fair trade, like supportive liberal fiscal policies. Arguably one of the most liberal senators in the Senate by some metrics. He's like winning in fucking Ohio. So the people don't want a fucking like perfectly palatable like person who never they never disagree with on any issues, only says things they like that makes them feel good. They want somebody they think is a strong liberal like consistent leader. That's not hard to be, but it is hard to be when you're not breaking from Biden and you're not creating a solid image of yourself.
Yeah. I think one of the major issues is like she's going for the television vote. Like she's going for
Yeah.
the TV audience of people who are historically better off, like more affluent, more comfortable. Like she's going for voters that have a lot of privilege that only care about Trump offending their sensibilities when he's on TV.
Yeah,
And I
like
think that that
crypto
would have worked
rooms.
with that worked with Joe Biden, but a lot of those voters are maybe going to think, well, I think she's ineffective. I think she's weak. They're not necessarily going to go and vote for Trump because they find Trump to be unconscionable or gross or whatever. Or some might actually end up still voting for Trump because of the economy, right? Um,
Yeah.
I think it puts her on shaky ground for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, I go as far as to say her strategy is actively detrimental compared to what she's doing because she needs people to feel like they have a sense of what she stands for. She needs people to have a sense that she's a strong leader, separate from her boss who they hate and think is a failure. That would look a lot more like making bigger swings than what she's been doing so far. It would look a lot like doing kind of what she did at the start, picking walls, like doing the price cap stuff, like you said. But she has like shirked away from that lately, and it's caused the polling to really kind of stagnate for her. And it like is not in a good of a position who that compared to the rest of the party are like compared to where she could have been otherwise. I still think that like the fundamentals here, my personal opinion on how this shakes out, I think even if she isn't throwing people a bone, people actively want to vote for her enough that they will just kind of be like, oh, whatever, even if she hasn't like really like won my heart over like this. I want to have this strong liberal leader. I want to have
Yeah.
somebody who like is capable of running the country in the way that like I want, and I'll force myself to see that in her. That could get her over the line. I think the party has seen enough consistent strength in the states that they need that she's probably still on track to get a narrow win here. The Sun Belt, very give or take at this point, but she doesn't need the Sun Belt. She just needs these three states where Democrats have been doing well consistently across the board. Republicans are not bringing the kind of message that they need to win among these people. I still think all else equal, even when you see the polling where she's down in Wisconsin or Michigan, the Quinnipiac thing, like that's what you'll see every now and again on a statistical distribution when she has an error leading a state. You're going to see some polls that show her down. There'll be a poll that shows her up by 5. Quinnipiac had literally a poll that had her up by 5 in September. And then they'll have a poll that have her down by a little bit, like within the margin of error. That's just what is going to happen when you have like uh like a narrow lead. It could probably be bigger, but it's not like fatal. I think like my personal take on it is that I will probably still predict her to win unless the bottom totally falls out in the next couple weeks.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see what happens because never never doubt the Democratic Party's ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. It was it's been mind numbing to watch them go immediately back after like a momentary lapse of judgment and demonstrating competency like a normal competent party would after swapping Biden out and even putting Tim Walz on the ticket. They very quickly pack that shit up and are just, I guess making this historically unpopular Donald Trump come across as like as a reasonable alternative every single day for
Yeah,
not
and
me obviously, but many
yeah,
Americans it seems.
yeah, and I'll say somebody asked in the chat, which is good. What does the bottom falling out look like? I'd say like if the final polls at the end of the year like show like consistent and like like strong movement away from her. Like if her national lead falls or if Trump starts leading, or if like high quality pollsters start like consistently showing a distribution that represents Trump leading, I'd say all else equal, like she probably fucked up and didn't win over people's trust and might not be on track to win. But it's hard for me to imagine like a scenario where she's like totally out of it like in the next couple weeks.
Yeah. Um okay. Well, Ed and Germentum, thank you so much for
Yeah, thanks
coming
for
on
having
and
me
making
on.
the case.
Yeah, if people want to read more about this, I have my uh official prediction map article that is I still would like kind of hold on to and say is like what I believe. I'll be updating it hopefully in a week. Like once the new polling comes out. Uh uh I'm gonna be working on a new article soon about like how to just follow this stuff in general without going fucking crazy because yesterday was like vibes 9/11. But like I have a lot of other stuff like this on my thing, like this kind of perspective that people don't like usually look at or like just generally, I would say like there are very few people in the world of electoral analysis who are not liberals. So if you're interested in getting an in-depth look uh, into politics and how elections are going from somebody who like I've been pretty good about this stuff in the past and is not a fucking shit libo asshole. Uh, like I have been pretty good at that. So check me out at Substack, and I'll see you guys maybe on election night, maybe earlier than that.
Yeah.
But
The
yeah, see you all.
you gotta put the khaki on.
Yeah, I'm gonna be the Steve Kornacki of the San world on election night. This is
All right.
what everything's led up to. But see y'all.
All right. Bye.